without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about what is on my tiny little mind today. Uh, so, you know, as I go through my life and as I get older, it's happening more and more that people come up to me and tell me that the Torah is irrelevant to them. Um, they tell me that everything that is in the Torah is stuck in antiquity and is nothing to do with today. That it was written and followed by people who believe in folklore and all focused on the whims of some mythological super being, an invisible person that lives in the sky and does magic tricks. But for those who think that today's Torah reading is meant to be an accurate depiction of a historical event, it's easy to understand how they come to that conclusion. The thing is, today's Torah reading brings us a lesson that is remarkably modern, but it was unintended, as you're going to find out. It happened by accident, a little while after we got the Torah. But while not earth-shaking, it is something that shows the power of Torah. You see, today's Torah reading tells us that the style of human warfare that was common at the time and that has been periodically used throughout history, especially during the Shoah and history's seemingly never-ending Islamic extremist outbursts like October 7th and so on, have no place in civilization. We all know that today's Torah reading focuses on Noah and his family's experience. But while this story may float your boat, pun intended, with your permission, I would like to fast forward to when the flood had receded and the doors of the ark had opened. In Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 8, verses 15 through 19, it says that God had commanded Noah to leave the ark and to release the animals back onto the dry land. Next, we read God's covenant that this type of worldwide disaster would never happen again. And we have always been taught that God sealed this promise, this covenant, by placing a rainbow in the sky. And that's where the trouble begins. The thing is, there is a huge problem with this translation, or with this understanding. In Bereshit chapter 9, verses 12 and 13, the word rainbow, while it may appear in translations, in fact, in almost every translation, never appears in the original Hebrew. The word rainbow does not appear. There is a word that could be translated as rainbow, but it doesn't mean rainbow at this point. A more accurate translation is that God said, "This is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you and every living creature with you, to generations forever. I have set Kashti," the word Kashti, which means my bow, in the clouds. It shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. All right. So, this is kind of interesting because the translators of the original Hebrew, people understood Kashti as meaning my bow. They understood it that way, but when they translated it as my rainbow. And in modern usage, Kashti does mean a bow. It also means a rainbow. So why should you know that the word keshet is used. You should know this. The word keshet is used several times in the Tanakh, but it always means bow. And in the Torah, in the Tanakh, it's only used twice in the entire Tanakh. Once in Ezekiel, Yechezkel, and once in Shemuel. And there it means rainbow. You can tell by the context. Otherwise, it never means rainbow in the Torah at all, even though it's used many times. It's always translated as bow, except here. So why does it matter? Well, frankly, just so you'll know, I have no idea whatsoever, but I can try and figure it out, and I'm going to do that with you now. So during the time leading up to the flood, the ancient world used the word keshet, bow, to represent a tool used to kill animals for food. It never meant a bow tie. It meant the bow, an arrow, right? That's what it meant. So they used to use it to kill food so they could eat. It was for peaceful things. How it wasn't, I mean, you could use it in war, but it wasn't, it's like a knife. You can use a knife to kill people, but you can use it to cut meat, right? But it's a tool, the word bow. It's not anything other than that. However, the ancients used the rainbow to represent wars that were fought to prove whose gods were more powerful. Rainbows were also a sign used to brag about something. In other words, the rainbow was a symbol for, at the very least, winning an argument, but most of the time, when winning full-blown holy wars, wars that were fought using the most barbaric, inhumane means possible, like was done on October 7th. That was how those things were represented by the ancients. Rainbows symbolized the most vicious of wars. So there's many opinions about who was the actual author of the Torah. Was it God? Was it Moshe? Was it a bunch of people sitting around having drug-induced visions or on great acid trips? Was it an integration of some or all of these? Your guess is as good as mine, except for those of you who happen to have been there at the time. But whatever we happen to believe does not change the fact that even though the translators changed the meaning of a symbol that they absolutely knew was mostly intended for war, it is very hard for me to understand. However, we want to spin it. Doesn't matter how you spin it. The Hebrew word the commentators changed is keshet, which means bow. As in bow and arrow, a tool which could be used for good or evil, but used for food to sustain life. The bow in the sky was used to sustain life. But this rainbow, forget about it. It was used to signify the worst of the worst violence imaginable. So what's going on here? Why does the Torah use bow, a tool of violence, or could be for violence, and the translators use rainbow, representing extreme, inhumane, vile, vicious violence, to represent God's covenant? Why? How can they do such a thing? My guess is that it is probably a function of timing. Remember, this appeared right after the full 40 days and 40 nights of constant violent storms. Can you imagine living in that ark? The people lived on the top, the animals lived in the middle, and the things that the people and the animals would remove from themselves would wind up in the bottom. The noise of the animals, the rocking of the ship and the bouncing and the this and the seasickness and all this and that and the smells. Oh my God. Can you imagine? I mean, what could be worse than that? So they thought about it and said, it couldn't mean bow, it must mean rainbow. But the word bow and rainbow were never meant to suggest war or peace, is what they thought. On the contrary, they were meant to remind Noah and his generations that this covenant came after the punishment brought by God, the God of all gods. This divine symbol showed us that God would no longer tolerate humans who acted like animals. Wouldn't tolerate it anymore. So that as if human beings ever behaved like that again, there would be more of the same. So if you don't behave, this rainbow shows that you're going to be punished. Don't forget it. It was more of a promise of what was to come if they didn't choose to behave. It was a lesson about humanity over inhumanity. It's a reminder. It was on purpose. That must be how they thought about it. They didn't think about it in a peaceful way. They thought about it exactly the way people used it. It wasn't a promise of peace. It was a promise of, you're going to get it. Because after that, there was a listing of curses that would happen. So why the translators redefined the symbol that represents a tool that could be used for hunting or eating and keeping life going, and then calls for an all-out war that remains a mystery for the ages, unless you agree with me. And of course I'm right. How else could I be? But it is as if they had changed the meaning of the word war to mean peace. This is what people thought. And in this respect, the Torah translators were amazingly successful in changing rainbow from representing the horrors human beings can do to each other into representing peace. We read the Torah, we want it to represent peace, so we think rainbow is peace. And that's how they thought. The rainbow says, you don't have to be mean and rotten and kill people and take their heads off. You can be peaceful. It's a reminder of that. Can you imagine that? So is the Torah irrelevant? Does it represent mythology? If it does, then the mythological power of the Torah has over changing the meaning of war to peace is amazing. It's powerful. What do you think of when you look at the sky and see a rainbow? Do you say, oh, look at that rainbow, it means we're going to have to be beheaded? No, the opposite happens. You look at the rainbow, you say, how beautiful. And you get a peaceful feeling inside. It happens to everybody. And this is because of what happened with the Torah. It forced this change. So how can I say that? What right do I have to say this? I'll tell you why. Because I keep reading from there. The Torah doesn't end there. The Torah quickly changes the subject from the devastation caused by the flood to a future that begins with Avram and Sarai. It is as if we are being told that the sooner we get over the flood, the better we're going to be. Remember, it was only 2 weeks ago, when I sat before you, all bedecked in white, in a kittel, a white tallis, a white yarmulke, the curtains on the parochas on the ark were white. 2 weeks ago, we did Yizkor, and I prayed for the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Ever since, we have repeated those words during each prayer service, and will continue to repeat them until Pesach. Mashiv haruach u'morid hagoshem. May the wind blow and the rain fall. Why would we ask God to make the wind blow and the rain fall if it would remind us of the flood? Why? It doesn't. Why would we call for the rain when the rainbow, a symbol of extreme war, so often follows? Why? The answer is really not complicated. Nobody wants to associate life-supporting rain with life-ending floods. Everyone wants rain to represent God's mercy, God's compassion, and God's desire to sustain, not to take life. Everyone loves the peace that comes when the rain ends. And we sure had a lot of rain last week. When we look at what the Torah translators did to change the meaning of rainbow, it is not hard to see why the world wanted to reject it as a symbol of war and to readily accept it as a sign of God's peaceful covenant with all of humanity. It is not hard to see that the ancient use of the universal symbol of war, once represented by the rainbow, could be replaced by the very Jewish Torah-inspired transformation of its meaning to shalom. For all those who declare that the Torah has become irrelevant, and what could be more relevant than this? What is not relevant about the timeless, innovative, even revolutionary thinking that the Torah brings to our modern civilization? Our Torah causes not just our fellow Jewish people, but all of humanity to rethink and transform the way we live. The Torah is anything but stuck in time. The Torah offers universal notions that unstick time. It is irrelevant that our Torah, is it irrelevant that our Torah was the first to introduce the modern idea that all people are created equal to enjoy peace, freedom, prosperity, privacy, happiness, and fulfillment. It was in the Torah before it was in any other document. Is it irrelevant that it is our Torah that is the original source to allow all humankind to propel ourselves from being subjects with no rights to being individuals with rights and personal responsibilities? Is it irrelevant that our Torah redirects us from being a bunch of bragging and immoral, war-loving people into being a set of individuals who each share love with each other and with God? Is it irrelevant that the Torah teaches humankind to turn our swords into plowshares? How irrelevant is our Torah when it teaches us to transform our warlike symbols into what rainbows promise after a storm? The relevance of our Torah is actually more important today than it has ever been in our entire history. And with that, I'd like to say Amen, Shabbat Shalom, and Am Yisrael Chai.